So let's start with a question about looking at what offline documents are by talking about how FileHold does formatting for your documents. So FileHold stores content in one of three formats, and a couple of these you're definitely going to be familiar with, and offline documents you might not be. But we're going to start with our documents, and that's any file that can be modified by users who have permission to do that. So that involves anytime you can check a document out, make changes to it, check it back into the system. So there's it's your standard when we talk. We're always referring to documents within FileHold, but really it's your file. And then there are records, and those are files that cannot be modified and are preserved in the system moving forward. And then our third classification is offline documents. And an offline document is anything where we're storing a metadata and an audit record, but there's no file attached to it. The document itself exists offline, hence the name offline documents. So an offline document is a really useful tool for bringing your content together without needing to upload a document into it. We're going to take a look at some use cases in a moment, but I just wanted to point out first that when we talk about documents and records, those are format labels related to uploaded files. So we're not uploading any content into offline documents. So they occupy very, very little space within your system. They're really a nominal amount of information. They're truly just a database entry that you have. Now, there's also we can think about in terms of that documents and offline documents can be checked out and modified. And that's why we're calling them offline documents instead of offline files, because they belong associated with the documents because they do have that check-in and check-out process. Documents and records are related to content. We're usually talking about bringing something in, whether it's a digital version of a paper document or a native-born digital document, whereas an offline document is usually related more to a process for how we're moving things through the system. So in that spirit, let's look at some common use cases for offline documents. Probably the most common is as a placeholder. So you have future content that's going to be coming into the system, you have yet to add it in, but you need to either capture metadata or exert a level of control or perhaps even put that through a workflow. But eventually, your intention is not to store the offline document as an offline document. The intention is to eventually replace that with an actual uploaded document. So placeholders are probably our most common use. Secondly, forms. And I'm saying forms because we're not using forms as in where we're bringing in a PDF that's been filled out by somebody and we're processing it, or we've got an electronic document they're bringing in. This is where we're just getting the user to enter the metadata directly into the system. So it's a FileHold user, and so we're capturing that content without having a document attached to it. In this case, the content that we're after is the metadata. It's not a representation for something else. It's all you actually need. And actually, our corporate FileHold system has an innovative use of this, in my opinion. Because we're all using FileHold, that's where we do our leave requests. We just complete an offline document, and then that form request goes to whoever needs to approve it through a workflow. So we're using that form content for an offline document. Third is where we're representing a process. So this is where we want to show action that's happening, an internal process, but we don't have a document directly that's attached to it. We're using the offline document to represent the process, to show us that process within there. And the classic example of that, we're going to see it in a moment, and I've talked about this in previous webinars, is a legal hold. The legal hold is a process as opposed to a document itself. Now, maybe you get an order that says it's a legal hold and you want to make that the inciting document, but in this case, we can use the legal hold represented by an offline document. And finally, an opportunity to preserve an audit record. So even though the content might be removed from the system, might be deleted, might be purged, but the audit trail can remain when it's an offline document because we can keep that content without having to keep the documents themselves. Now, how do you make an offline document? There's three common ways to do it. The first one is at creation. We can do that by building it into the schema. We can do it as a manual conversion. We can take our document or our offline document and convert it to a document through a check-in, check-out process. That's the, or we can do it from a document that we then convert into an offline document. And then finally, it's an alternative to deletion, which is a manual process. And it's effectively a manual conversion, but the intention here is to preserve the document's audit record as opposed to simply removing the document and those records at the same time. So a couple of different ways to make offline documents. And with that, let's take a dive into offline documents. Let's just get out of my PowerPoint over here. And head back, we're seeing my background there, and let's hop into the desktop application. So you can see I've got a single, a single document into here, and we know this is an offline document because of this symbol here. This, paper with a gray dot in it. This is our symbol for an offline document. So I immediately know that this is offline document for content. I also can see that I've got all my stoplights on this. So I have access to this and I can control it just like any other content. So when I select this, I can delete it, I can check it out, I can make a local copy, although that's not really going to do anything for me because in this case, it's an offline document, there's nothing to copy down from there. Where we really get to the richness of this is when we take a look at the document's metadata. So when I open up my metadata panel, I can see the notes of interest for me. In this case, the matter number, the matter description, and the expected end date. So I can see that information tagged to this, just like any any file that you've added into here, whether it's a document or a record. I still maintain that through using the metadata and file properties screen. And I can also see who owns a document, in this case owned by me, what its status is, that it's checked in, approved, all the same information that I see. And then down here, the format for this is an offline document, so I can see this being used. So in this case, we're seeing a representation of a process, but from a user point of view, we just see this as accessible information that I can get to whenever I need to. So I can see the expected end date up to here, and just like anything else, I can update the document's metadata as expected. So I have those as a set of options. So that's our initial version of this, which is how we're talking about when we're adding content into the system and what we're dealing with as far as what an offline document is. Now, we can create an offline document schema just like any other schema. So up under Administration, Library Configuration, Document Schemas, and then from here, plus sign. And where we determine if this is going to be, what kind of document it is right here, where we say it's going to be an offline document. So in this case, we're going to call this one, let's just call this webinar. So we've got our webinar session over here. So let's say this is a webinar, let's call it a webinar reflections, right? So just some comments that I might want to make about a webinar that we did. And let's try doing this typing properly so we can actually get the words in. All right, so we'll call it webinar reflections, and it's just meant to be a log of my activity that I did on a webinar. So I'm making an e-form for myself where I'm capturing some information, but I don't really need a piece of paper or an e-piece of paper attached to that. I just need the information for it. So I could fill up my membership like I normally would. In this case, I will skip that step because, again, this is only for a webinar, but you want to determine who's going to be allowed to see these. And then we're going to attach our metadata fields. And in this case, I'm going to put just a couple of fields onto this. So let's first of all choose a date, and let's make some notes just so I can have a couple of points of contact onto this. I'm just looking for my notes. There it is. Perfect. And we're going to add those two fields, and there they are. The rest of this, I could do things like under workflow. I could put this through an approval process. So if I wanted to route this to my supervisor to say, this is what I did, they can look at that, and then I've got a record that they actually reviewed it or even approved it. So I've got that as a record. I can potentially courier this out, but it doesn't make a lot of sense when it comes to an offline document because you're really just after capturing the metadata. Custom naming, let's use this. So we're going to take, first of all, our date and our notes. Just a couple of points onto that. We'll give this a name automatically. And then I could put auto filing rules onto this, but I'm not going to bother for right now. Also not going to bother with my event schedule or my lookup. They're all fine. So we're going to say okay to that. And we've created our new offline document type. So you'll see that there is this purple button up here, and this might be grayed out in your system. If you're using FileHold 17, you might be seeing this from 16.3 on. We added this purple button up here, which is the ability to add an offline document. But in order for this button to be enabled, you need to have a schema that has an offline document enabled to it. So that's why it's giving me this as an option. It may not give it to you because if you don't have a schema that uses offline documents, it might be grayed out. But in my case, I can click onto this, and then it's going to offer me the metadata field just like I normally would with anything else, where I can put in the fields that I need to. So in this case, and of course, because I just built a schema, I may need to do a quick refresh. So let's just do refresh all. And I'm actually going to go up into my inbox. not for any other reason other than to say, here's that add offline document again. We'll set the metadata for it, webinar reflections, and we'll use today's date. And we'll say offline documents, Chris is a bad typist. There we go. So just make some comments onto that, of course, and then we can save this. And now I've got my metadata saved to the document. Just like anything else, I have to determine who's going to be allowed to see this. So just for the sake of clarity, we're going to set our destination and put this into the same folder as our legal hold one, not where I'd normally want to file it, and then we'll send it into the system. Off it goes. So because there's no text to add, it's obviously going to be a very clean and fast process to bring that in. But now I can go over to my legal holds, and there's my document renamed as I wanted to with my notes field put into it. So there's my offline document that I've added into there. So I've captured a process, I've added it into the system from an offline document schema. So I've got that into there. And in this case, it's not a placeholder document. This is literally just saying, hey, I've got content into here that's held into place. Now you can search for an offline document just like anything else in the system. So if I come over to search and move to my advanced mode, I can go into my special fields, document format, and then here I can choose my offline documents. And here's some different examples of offline documents that I have in the system. So in this case, this is a set of legal records that were brought into here. So, folder representations. Over here, I have a series of HR binders. Again, not real documents, but placeholders that indicate where this might happen to be stored within the system. So in this case, this is out-of-date HR materials in basement room 104, which again, was just me putting something into here so that we'd have a value to check against. So the idea is that I have content that I want to catalog, that I want to capture in my system, but I don't exactly want to reinforce where it is. So I'm not going to bother scanning it. So I'm just going to put it over here. There's another example of that where I've got forms from 97 to 2008, but even here I don't have the same amount of information. And you'll also see that as we look down this list, we have different schemas being used. That's the second point of this. You can always convert an existing document to an offline document, or you can add content in and then have it as an offline when it starts off. So again, we have this document under some level of control. We can see it's 4 years old, and we have its different policies into place, and again, still tagged as an offline document. Now remember, I can also enforce onto this the same retention policies that I have with everything else. So I can delete, I can archive, I can do that. Again, these are representing process. As I look further down my list, we'll see some of my other things. So I've made some records into here. There's my legal holds, there's my webinar reflections. So again, some of those values have been put into this to be able to allow me to utilize this offline document to its fullest capability. All right, we have our content, we've had a look at it. That's how we can create an offline document, how we can search for it. Now let's talk about conversion and why that might be an important thing to do. So for example, I have something is into this like miscellaneous documents pre-move, and it was a hard copy filing type for it. So this it has a retention policy on it, which is currently expired. Let's say we've just done a scan of this. Now we want to bring this back into the system as a brand new document. We can do that easily. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click onto this and I'm going to check the document out, because the checkout process, which by the way is nothing to download, so it pretty much does it instantly, now has this flagged as a checked out document. So now I'm going to go through the process of checking this back in. So first thing I would need is I would need my newly scanned document. So let's say that my bitmap image here is my newly scanned document. So this is the document this is actually representing, whether it was a single page or a case file or whatever, doesn't matter. It's just indicating that this is my newly scanned document that I want to bring over here. We're just using this as a representation. So I'm going to come back into my document. I'm going to right click onto this and we're going to check in this document. And in the process, I want to convert this offline document to an electronic document. As soon as I did that, this turned on. If I deselect this, it's an offline document. All I'm doing is I'm doing a checkout process because I want to update the metadata or refresh content on it. But in this case, we're going to convert this offline document to an electronic document. We'll delete the local copy after it's been checked in, and we'll edit the document's metadata. Now I just have to point this at the right location. So in this case, there's my newly scanned document. Great, and now we're going to check this in. So I've got my opportunity here to put in new information. So I can say my Newer date for revision onto this. We'll move this to January 1st, 2024. So I've got a new policy onto this. The box number, not applicable now. Actually, I'm just going to leave that blank because I don't actually need that information into there. If I had a classification, I can put that on it. All my actions are done. I can click Save. And my document appears to be missing from that now because it's gone away because I've just done a conversion onto it. So let's take a look at file date, date last modified today. There's my document, and now we can see it is still hard copy filing, newly scanned document, so it has its original file name into there. And now this is where I might say it's no longer hard copy filing. I'm going to change this to a different document type. So I'm going to reclassify it up to here. Now, from a compliance point of view, I can go into my version history over here, and I can see what's happened to this. So I can select my document, look at the usage of the file. In this case, it was checked in, metadata was edited, or I can go back over to here, and I can go into my, edits to metadata. Let's go back to version history, select version 1, look at the usage, and there we go. So it was added, it was linked, it was scheduled for deletion, it was recovered, and then it was checked out. So I can see that original audit history is still preserved into the system from that offline document from before. So any changes that were made to it, any impact from an organizational point of view for my placeholder is still preserved in the system. This is why it's better if you're using an offline document to do a conversion than it is to simply add the new document that was there before, because now I have a continuity of that audit trail. All right, let's go back to my version history. Let's go back to my folder. So now I have my document. It's been added into here. It's still under the same location where it was before. And now we hit our retention policy. So now we've said, okay, in fact, the retention doesn't expire January 1st. Maybe it expired, May 23rd. So now I have content. It's already been converted, but I need to get rid of it. So now what I want to do is I want to convert this online document, this real document, into an offline document, which if I right click onto this and I'm an administrator, I have the option over here of converting it to an offline document. So I can do that if I want to. Now, when I do this, the document converted to an offline document, the files associated with all versions of these documents will be permanently deleted. This action cannot be undone. Do you wish to proceed? When we're doing a conversion, we are purging the electronic version of the document, and all we're going to leave behind is going to be the audit record and any of the metadata that I have associated with this. So we're going to say OK. And then it's going to give me an option here to either convert this to offline and destroy the files, or convert to offline and export the files. So maybe I want to keep the metadata for it, but I want to preserve those documents somewhere else. Again, your system, your policies, your rules. In my case, I want to convert to offline and destroy it. So I'm going to say OK. Now we're back again to an offline document, and we're still at version 2 of this. If we go into our version history, and we'll go to our newly scanned documents, and we'll go to usage of file, convert to offline document was done at 2:20 p.m. So I've got a timestamp on that that tells us when this process was actually happened. So again, we're looking at asserting the rights for this document. Now the advantage of this is all of that information about this, all of that history is still preserved into this. So I have the ability to go back and look at that audit record, look at those points of detail. I haven't lost content from my database. So this is a great alternative to deleting documents, especially if you need a record of deletion. One thing you can also do is once you do the conversion onto this, you could also reassign it to a different schema. Like you could, for example, have a deleted document schema where you're also going to drop a bunch of the common metadata that you have. Maybe your metadata that you have for a document has a bunch of identifying information towards an individual. Maybe you have client information onto there, such as, a social insurance number or some value like that, that is, somewhat private and you don't want that to be publicly exposed. Maybe it's an email address. Maybe it's something that once this document goes out of retention and you want to get rid of it, you want to make sure that you can keep this document accessible to others in the future. I'm not being vague with this. I'm saying that there's all kinds of circumstances that we encounter with retention policies that are very specific, and some information is to be kept and some information is to be disposed of. Well, if we convert this to a different schema, then we can choose what metadata fields that new schema is going to have that are going to retain that information versus dispose of that information. So maybe I get rid of, for example, the box number and the Tom Rooms classification and stick with some other fields instead. So you have some options here as to what you do after you do that conversion, because common metadata fields automatically transfer when you change the schema from one type to another. Uncommon or unique metadata fields do not transfer, which is, I think, what we'd probably expect to see from the performance. So the last thing I wanted to cover today, and again, we've done other videos onto this, is the idea of using an offline document as part of a process where you're going to use workflow to guide it through. And here's our use case for this. We're going to go back over to our legal holds area, and we have a legislation document over here that has a workflow process that's attached to it. So I could initiate legal holds. Now, the reason I'm doing this on the primary document is because I don't want to do an approval process on a document that may not have been approved. I don't want file hold to confuse this process with another one. The reason I'm doing this as an approval process is because it allows me to sign this off. So in this case, I've made a workflow initiator document, so I don't have to define the name. I know it's going to be me. I'm going to say OK. So now I have a document that is going through a legal hold and it's pending approval. And this will only release from that once I approve the document. So now I have the opportunity to come back and add content to this. So maybe I'm looking for everything that is related to a matter number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to do a generic 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on all of my documents over here. We're going to search for those. So there's my documents in the system. We're going to organize these by approval status because in my example here, I just want the content that's either not submitted for approval or has a status such as approved. What I don't want to have is this one here that says pending approval, because I can only do this with active documents going through workflow. This document is not going to be going through any processes. By the way, this is my document going through workflow. So that's why it found this. I just want to separate this because now I'm going to right click on all of these, workflow, add to an existing workflow. And we're going to choose these to be this anticipated legislation and as supporting documents. So nothing further to check here. And I'm going to say OK. So now all of my content has immediately changed from where so now if doesn't matter what I select, I don't have the right to delete this. I don't have the right to check it out. All I can do is see that they're accessible in the system. And when I go over to my workflow status report, we'll see our legislation over here. Here's our document. And if I say show documents, we get this big long list. But remember, these are all supporting documents. This is the main document. So if I approve this, I'm approving my workflow document, which will then release the workflow for the other documents that I have supporting. Let's see that. So we're going to come over to here. We're going to complete our task. And then this window is going to load. It always takes a moment to load for the first time. So I should have had this loaded in advance. I usually live in workflow, so I'm doing this all the time. The workflow menu will give me the option to be able to say, so I've got to approve one document with 48 supporting documents. So here under my workflow history, we can see the extensive list of documents that I've added into here. So let's say, yes, I'm going to approve this because we no longer need to have these under legal hold. So we can say legal action did not move forward. So I got a nice explanation onto this. Password is required. I enter my password and I say, OK. So approval submitted, and now if I go back and we'll do our search again, and we're going to look for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because that was my matter number, and we find all of our documents, and if I scroll over to the side here, these are still listed as not submitted for approval, because the workflow status change that I made to my single document that I ran through does not impact any of these. So if I scroll down to the bottom here, we'll see here is my different documents that have been approved. So we know they're at the bottom of my list. And scroll back over and we'll find our offline document here, which is easy to spot because of that symbol. And if I right click onto this, go into the workflow and view the sign-off sheet, there's my document, or there's my workflow. It's been approved, who initiated it, when it was assigned, when it was completed. So now if any of these documents hit their retention cycle, I've got evidence that says what documents went through because I've got a record of what happened in that workflow. Remember over here under my status report, I can pull this open and I can see show the documents, and I can see all the related documents to that one. So I still have access to all of this content. I still have access to all of these details, but what I'm not seeing is an accidentally misassigned approval to a document. That's now missing from the system. So offline documents are not used as strongly, obviously, as documents or records because they exist in a particular liminal state of where they are representations of information that are within the system. The advantage is they're very easy to work with. They have almost no size whatsoever. They can do a complex job of representing processes, and they certainly do an excellent job of indicating ownership, audit record, all of those details, but without having to trip over all the content within the system. So with that in mind, I hope you have an opportunity to use offline documents in the future.